Now I'd like to welcome to the show David Bahnsen, founder and chief investment officer at the Bahnsen Group, host of the National Review podcast, The Capital Record, and author of the recently published and excellent work on book on work and vocation, full-time work and the meaning of life. Welcome to Free the Economy, David.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So my first question for authors is always an easy one. Why did you write this book?
Well, the easy part of the answer is that it's a topic that heavily animates me and has for some time. I think that the probably more interesting or relevant piece is why I wrote it, when I wrote it, what made me do it now. It's a somewhat evergreen topic. A person of faith and of deep economic convictions who believes that work has a certain primacy in our lives and in our economic well-being. That is a message that is somewhat all seasonal. But I think that there is a sense in which I feel in the society something that I don't see with a lot of other topics that also animate me, and that is a declining view of work in the, call it, secular left, and a declining view of work in the conservative and often faith oriented right. So there are plenty of topics out there where me and my tribe are on one side and others are on another. And I feel strongly about it, but I don't write books about it. This is one where I felt pretty strongly that a lot of the good guys are getting it wrong too. And out of the COVID moment, it felt necessary to fast forward my desire to write this book.
Well, yeah, and I think if you look back, could be 30 years, could be 50 years into debates about work on the sort of the right versus the left, as you point out, uh, it's more the sort of Marxist-inspired left that ironically says, "Oh, people shouldn't really have to work. If we had a universal basic income or we had something like that, then people's work could be voluntary. They could kind of do whatever they wanted and felt like." And it's the conservatives who, the Republican Revolution with Newt Gingrich in the 90s said, well, no, we need to get people off welfare and back to work. William Bennett's Book of Virtues, the sort of conservatives from that era were very sort of uh, work is important, work is important is a virtue, work is important for self-respect and society and things like that. So it's, to me, reading this book, I think it was very interesting to point out that the kind of people who I think a casual observer of this debate would think would be most pro-work, maybe they're going a little wobbly on respect for work. Um, and and so, and we have this sort of cultural moment that's been evolving for a while, and the work dislocations of COVID have had a lot to do with that. But where, I read all of these trend stories on workplace trends and the corporate and business world, because I feel like that says a lot about how people feel about a market economy and capitalism in general. And so I see stories about self-care routines and mental health days off and work trends like quiet quitting, working just hard enough to not get fired. And that this is a good thing. This is sort of part of the therapeutic culture, right? That your subjective emotional state is the most important thing, and any other responsibilities are second. And so we have a lot of people saying Americans work too hard. And so I was sort of pleasantly interested to see someone writing a book that said, well, actually, maybe you're not working too hard. Maybe you're not working hard enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you've captured a lot of it in terms of some of this cultural milieu that surrounds it, and where the many that we would identify politically as being on the right have gotten mixed into it. I think it may be less interesting to those that aren't necessarily connected to a faith community or whose tendency is to view most of these things through a prism of the political, of what has taken place throughout a lot of the religious circles in American life. But I think in Catholic and especially evangelical circles in particular, there has been a very strong history around work that has declined significantly. Now, my own tradition, being in a Protestant evangelical world, I've observed it far more in the evangelical sense than I have others. But when we see the political dynamic you're talking about and the cultural, I don't think we can separate it from, and I spend a lot of time in the book in this lane. If you the kind of American founding fathers high regard for work, Bennett talking about it in the 1990s as a character issue, it was written into the ethos of American DNA in the 18th century that our forefathers from the 17th century had left us a high regard for work in the character of mankind. And it was taken for granted that there was an economic necessity, but also this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy about productivity. And I think that those of us who are very comfortable in the Burkean tradition believed that there was this simultaneous economic and spiritual benefit from work and from productive activity that stirred the soul of mankind and all the while built civilization. And of course, in the case of America, built this great empire, if you will. But it was deeply and intrinsically connected to certain faith commitments in the founding of the country. So if we've, as I propose in the book, gone into a 20th century moment where the faith community decided to start messaging a work is a necessary evil at best, and sometimes a closet Marxian approach to work, that really where we are most fulfilled in our lives are those periods of just rest and tranquility and separation from activity. The anxieties of life weigh on us, and that more or less work is to be regarded as something at the very best case that you have to do, but that you want to do as little of as possible. If the faith community goes there, there was no question that much of the rest of American culture was going to go there. And the resistance from the kind of Bernie Sanders wing wasn't going to be there. So really, I think the last straw was sort of a secular right-wing viewpoint that at least saw a merit in aspiration commercially. A kind of Randian, you can get ahead, and the 1980s ethos of commercial success from working hard. And I think that was never going to last because we have now decided we have enough of other people's money to float around that we don't have to go work for our own. So if the only reason to work is for sustenance, there other people have worked so productively that we can sustain ourselves from their work. And therefore, we have nothing holding the line against what is essentially the socialistic argument. And people like Bernie Sanders can say, because they're now holding the moral high ground. Mankind's going to be happier with a 32-hour work week. Our society can function with a 32-hour work week. So why in the world are we requiring a 40-hour work week? And by the way, those that are doing 70, 80, 90-hour work weeks, those we need to demonize them to the hilt. None of this is good. Whether your angle is economic, cultural, political, theological, in all categories, these things are unsustainable. And what I try to argue in the book is that they're most damaging to the soul of mankind, who is being stripped and robbed of their God-created purpose, which is to productively work and act on a daily basis.
Well, I like the way you have the book sort of unites these two strains, the sort of spiritual side and the kind of economic worldly side, um, in saying that in a market economy, this is one of these like very basic kind of free market philosophy things that you learn on your undergraduate seminar funded by the Koch Foundation. In a free society, to the extent that it is free, economic interactions are voluntary, which means you only make money if you satisfy someone else's needs and desires.
Yeah.
Right. And so the that sort of puts aside, I think, a lot of negative stereotypes, going back many centuries, which is that wealthy people got there by cheating and stealing and exploiting, and therefore a pursuit of wealth is, of course, not virtuous, right? Because you have to be non-virtuous to become wealthy in the first place. That's
Yeah.
the ancestral assumption. And understanding that in a modern market economy, with plenty of flaws along the way, but fundamentally, money flows to those who make life better for other people and for as many other people as possible. Um, and so I think that, to me, if I was talking to someone at my church and they gave me a very negative view of, wanting to be in sort of like the finance and wealth building world, I would say, well, you realize where that money comes from. When it's created, not stolen, and it is created because value has been created along the way, not because I have sort of, you know, tricked you into clicking the wrong button on a website and I'm taking your money from you. And that's the uniting of those two strands I don't see in very many books and much commentary these days. So I thought that was uh, a welcome emergence.
Well, I appreciate it. I will add to what you're saying because I believe that it cannot be done all the way and consistently, coherently without juxtaposing these things. My view of economics is not merely econometric or efficient or some argument for a superior allocation of resources. Though I never should cease to say that it is all those things. It is just not merely those things. It is fundamentally a belief about how the world works. And I can't make the argument for productive work apart from some key economic understandings that are reasonably indisputable. And I can't make an argument for certain economic understandings that are indisputable apart from many of these observations about the world and theological and moral presuppositions. Okay, so what you said is so important. If I start with the presupposition, this is not just an economic discussion, it becomes one about work. If we start with the belief that those who get ahead in life did so by taking from others, not by serving others, then you have started with a belief that forces you morally to need to impair and impede that person, that bad actor. If you start with the belief that wealth can be created, not merely distributed, that this is not zero sum, and that wealth can only be created by meeting the needs of others, serving others through the production of goods and services that enhance our quality of life. You not only have an entirely different economic worldview, but you do then, when we shift into the discussion of work, which is really the verb of economics. The von Misesian tradition can talk about human action. What
Mhm.
is human action but work?
Mhm.
Now, there are certain actions that are instinctive and intuitive and rational responses to, things for self-preservation, what have you. I make the point in the book where I'm getting into some of the more theological and exegetical stuff that ideas of mankind having dominion over the animals, stewarding the earth, caring for the garden, um, building civilization, being fruitful, multiplying. There's all kinds of synonyms and verbs out there. All of them amount to work, to
Right.
productive activity that is aimed towards an object. And so this understanding is not academic and it's certainly not political. You do not meet any need by digging a ditch and filling it up over and over again. So we on the right can use that as an anti-Keynesian argument when it comes to a matter of public policy. That's fine. But we also have to remember how important it is to this subject that the work we are doing is not merely meeting our own needs, but it is meeting our own needs by meeting the needs of others. That you create virtuous cycles and positive feedback loops through this human endeavor we call work. And the idea that we're in a time where people are more alienated than ever, more depressed. There's mental health, there's alcohol and drug abuse, there is significant societal conditions that most decent people bemoan. and that we're suggesting that the greatest antidote to those things ever concocted, the self-esteem and purposefulness that comes from human activity, that that's the problem instead of the cure, is outrageous to me.
Well, yeah, and the the question of where this is coming from, like you said, we've had if you look at trends about, young adults today, teenagers, young adults, you have a lot of positive things that say the culture warriors of the 1990s would be happy about. There's, fewer single mother teen births and things like that. But there's much higher alienation as measured in really difficult hard statistics like suicide rates for teenagers and young adults. And the question is, where is this coming from? How do we solve it? And it really made me think about trends in family formation. And so it's interesting. It's always interesting to me when people write books about big topics and broad social trends, but that are also rooted in their own personal experiences, right? And you write quite a bit in Full Time about your father's example of hard work and dedication and faithfulness, and his influence is obviously very important to your views on work and responsibility. But this makes me wonder, do you think some of the negative trends we're talking about here and broader attitudes towards work are simply because of a lack of positive influences, parental figures, of father figures, um, because we don't have as many intact families as we used to?
I do, but let's even start with where there is a positive family unit in place. The situation, I have a lot more sympathy where for those who don't have the positive family model in place. That's at least much more understandable to me. But one of the things I argue out of generational theory in the book is that the millennials who are a Gen Xer like me, and they're always pretty much our favorite target, and sometimes deservedly so. The millennials most certainly ran from a very young age, young adult age, with a low view of work. But where do people think they got it from? The baby boomers essentially were the hardest working generation in history, measurably so in terms of gross output, but did so with an eye on retirement. That even in healthy family units, we began messaging this idea that work was something you did for the purpose of not having to do it anymore. And I think that that has created a significant multi-generational problem. And in a lot of ways, we're victims of our own success post-war because we now had mortality that made something like retirement possible, 20, 30-year vacation at the end of our lives wasn't necessarily doable when life expectancy was 60, but with life expectancy at 80, it has been more or less on the radar of people from the time the baby boomer generation began entering the workforce. And then the prosperity, the real GDP growth we've experienced and asset price appreciation, other products and services around pensions and 401ks and IRAs and different vehicles that facilitated such a thing, home equity. There's a lot of things that made the concept of retirement just possible. And I argue in the book that for most of human history, retirement was essentially called death. People just they worked and then they died, and now we had the ability to have a period of removal from work. But I think that even in healthy family units, that mentality unfortunately did end up carrying a message that I think proved to be more malignant. And an awful lot of millennials kind of ran with it and just said, well, if you think the purpose of work is to be done at 58, so you can go back to the bar or the golf course or the sailboat or whatever it is, I'm just going to take that attitude at age 28 and then make demands on my employer and demands on my time and have a certain kind of posture, even concocting notions that I think are made up whole cloth, like work-life balance. Um, yeah, I think that a lack of a family unit is, I can't imagine how someone would have a healthy view of work in that regard. And yet I'm even more critical where people came up with a low view of work with a healthy family unit.
Well, yeah, I mean, you talk about this in the book, and then just now talking about how our view of retirement has changed. And if you go back far enough, right, there was no retirement, there was sort of death or disability. And now we have a wealthy society with lots of financial products, right? That are tailored to that, and you see TV commercials with uh, healthy looking middle-aged people with a little bit of gray in their hair getting on that sailboat.
Yeah.
Um, and and so, you know, you and your firm know a lot about financial planning. And so you've got a lot of, clients that come in every day and you've got to sort of give them tailored advice about, what to do with their money long term. And like you said, one of the biggest financial planning goal of practically everyone in America these days is like, well, when am I going to retire? When am I going to be able to retire? And it is another example of where a interesting crossover between the sort of deep sort of spiritual element to this and the sort of the everyday economic element to it. Because my private theory is that if you're a financial advisor, you're really a therapist as well, even if you don't think about it that way. Because when people start talking about their money and their goals, it gets very personal.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you know, there's a guy, he's popular on YouTube named Caleb Hammer. He does these personal finance audits, usually of people who are kind of in trouble with their personal finances, and he walks them through everything. He's sort of like a Dave Ramsey about 30 years younger. And and so when he talks to these people, you could think, oh, well, he's talking about how much money they make and how much they spend on rent and lattes, and it's just about dollars and cents, but it's really kind of a counseling therapy session. So it makes me wonder in your history in financial services, do you see that conflict between giving someone practical advice on where to put their money and kind of wondering if it's your place to give them advice on their goals in the first place? Or you're kind of tempted to say, think about this in a different way.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that is constantly in front of us in the wealth advisory profession is what exactly your role is. And the answer to your question is it really is a little bit different client by client. There's a comfort level, there's a relationship, there's a sort of permission structure in place with some that facilitates a lot more candor, a lot more therapy, if you will, digging in. And then there's others where, the relationship may not lend itself to some of that deeper, or may not lend itself right now to some of that deeper level of counsel and sort of existential advice. An awful lot of our clients at my firm, the Bahnsen Group, were entrepreneurs, business owners themselves who had liquidity events. And a lot of times, not always, um, these things are self-fulfilling prophecies because most entrepreneurs are serial entrepreneurs. So they come to us because they just had a major liquidity event and have sold a business and need advice and tax planning and estate planning and things like this. But they're already planning their next score. And so there are others that think they're done and then they get bored after a year or two, and we play a therapeutic role in that process, in that journey. I have a lot of experience with it now, and fortunately for me, I have a lot of experience combined with a lot of opinions, so I'm available to be a counselor in that role. But it varies person by person. But when not everybody owns a big business and has an 8 or 9 figure liquidity event. Others are accumulating money. They have an inheritance. They saved over the years, and they were employees, maybe well paid, people that have built a nice net worth. But nevertheless, they were more traditional financial advisory clients, and they have an eye on something called retirement. And yes, we do want to have those conversations. I am not here to tell all my clients they must adhere to my worldview.
Mm.
But we certainly want to, and just like I want to provoke out of the book, at least some introspection about what does everybody really want the senior years of their life to be a Charles Schwab commercial? I don't think so. Most of those commercials are practically self-satire events. Nobody sits around holding their wife's hand, walking on the beach every day, saying if they want to buy a vineyard or go sail with the grandkids or so. It just isn't life for anybody. And I think that having those conversations about what one wants to do, it's not I plan to be managing capital and engaged in capital markets and economic commentary till they carry me out in a box. Not every client, not every individual, not every loved one of mine has to feel the same way. But I do think the minimum bar for a fulfilling life is some form of useful, productive activity. And all I want to do is suggest in the book that if you think, oh, yeah, I'm getting ready to retire, I'm going to check out and I'm going to have more freedom with my time and money than I've ever had, which I'm all for. But now I'm going to, instead of channeling those energies into daily activities at the corner office, like what I'm sitting in right now, I'm going to go to a board meeting once a quarter. All I'm suggesting is maybe that isn't going to scratch the itch.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some great examples of people maintaining those very active, productive careers for a long time. I think Charlie Munger was 101 when he passed. We could, I think we could all do worse than follow his example. Uh, so there's another big sort of kind of cultural phenomenon here, which we kind of maybe hinted at a little bit before, that is big in the news when it comes to the workplace and corporate America, and that is uh, that big thing that is the in the wake of COVID, which is return to the office or working from home. And another thing that there's 10 stories about every single day. So this has been a debate where usually CEOs and senior managers are on the side saying, well, this is obviously in white collar office environments. This does not apply. Sometimes all of the people who work in offices like me think that we are the entire workforce, but there's plenty of people that works in stores and on farms and in factories. But among people who would normally work in an office, usually it's the senior managers who say, I want people back in the office. And it's a lot of non-management employees who say, no, I want to sit on my couch with my laptop, which I've done plenty of myself. Uh, and now there's been enough time that Harvard Business Review and different um, journalists have started rolling out some studies about, well, we've studied productivity in different places, and now we have some evidence out here, and some of those studies, when I've sort of read them, they sort of say, well, we took a survey of employees who prefer to work from home, and when they work from home, they're happier. So that validates that no one should have to return to the office. I'm like, well, okay, that's maybe part of the equation. So I'm suspecting I maybe won't be entirely surprised by your opinion on this, but where do you think? Because it's something that's so much in the news, and it is a sort of kind of what the way people think about that, I think says a lot about what they think about work in general.
Oh,
So
yeah.
where's the return to office fight as far as you're concerned?
Well, it's very clear for anyone who's been paying attention that the opinions I very loudly shared starting as early as 2020 and went into hyperdrive in 21 and into 22, being a vehement proponent of work in office and an opponent of a lot of the cultural and economic damage that was being done from these work from home policies and moments, that now a couple years later, I'm no longer in the minority, that the stakeholders, the very, very pragmatic position holders at Amazon and Netflix and Disney and IBM, and by the way, ironically enough, the company Zoom, have all come to is we need to get our people back in office. And some have done so with more bravado than others. Some have done so a little apologetically. Most have done so to rectify a problem they created, that they acted very foolishly in 20 and 21, acting as if a certain moment that there was not going to be any cost to trying to make these things permanent. But I agree with what you said entirely, that you could tell a lot about what someone thinks about work. Every now and then you'll hear someone say, I'm just plain more productive at home. It's better for me. And I always say, did you work from home before COVID? And a lot of the people who have been most offended at my public posture on this entirely miss my point. They'll say, am a self-employed architect and I've been working out of a home office since 1988. And I say, then what makes you think I'm talking to you? This doesn't have anything to do with you. I'm talking about people that up until March of 2020 always went up and went to work and dealt with coworkers up and down the hallway, walking into offices, meetings in the conference room, whatever the case may be, and that had a culture in their business, created a brand that was public facing around their shared activity together, and that were either beneficiaries of or contributors to mentorship. This is the area of self-centeredness that I find utterly unforgivable. That people who now are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, that when they were in their 20s, 30s, sat in an office and in a shared work environment and learned from others and had real-time interactions, and someone over their shoulder, they over their shoulder, working together, being seen, getting credit for what they did, having the live, real-time in place moments that organically happen, that now is decided I want to deprive a younger generation of those things. Nobody believes that's being even remotely honest or self-aware that that type of experience can be recreated on a video screen. There are some businesses that it's more intense than others. In financial services, it would be dysfunctional to have your research and trading and advisory and client facing and tax group and operations and all of the departments that are involved in the supply chain of this service all from home, in their bedrooms, in their living rooms. There is a real-time interaction that is vital to the energy, but also the intellectual cohesion of the work being done. I think that's the case in most white-collar lines of work. A lot of the people that became advocates of work from home seem to have no regard for their blue-collar neighbors who didn't get the option. But let's put aside the kind of elitism of a lot of the work from home mentality. It comes at a cost. And this is part of where I am a conservative, is not in a political or right-wing approach to issues. It's an orientation about tradition. That I do not believe things came to be for no reason. And there are times where things become obsolete, or you have new technologies, new opportunities that supersede what came before. But we talked with COVID as if it was an accident that people used to go to an office and work together. And that now, because of Zoom and the cloud, no one needed to do it anymore. As if the various things that over the years and decades that preceded it, that resulted in us working together in this more collaborative, cooperative environment, were an accident. They have tremendous advantages to the brand, culture, mentorship, collaboration that makes companies flourish. Stakeholders in these companies are demanding it. They've seen the productivity drop. But ultimately, the very essence of the argument for the work from home school of thought always can be reduced when you have the conversation honestly enough and long enough to someone making the argument that they enjoy not having to commute, that they enjoy being right there in case their kid needs something or their spouse needs something in the middle of the day, that they enjoy not putting pants and a shirt on, and all that stuff. Yeah, I don't apologize for my view on this. I think there's an advantage to waking up, putting your clothes on, taking a shower and shaving and going to work and being with your coworkers and fostering an energy around it. And if there are days and moments that modern technology provides a flexibility for certain optionality, then obviously I'm all for that. And we can take advantage of that. But everybody being honest about the cultural moment, about federal government workers that have not been required to go back to work, gaming the system. This is not about people having their own preference, like they would pick an ice cream flavor between work from home and work from office. This became a way to let people work less, period. And I think that the work from home moment has been an embarrassment.
Well, you heard it, folks. David says, get back to the office. Um, and the sort of kind of cultural sort of conservative, small c conservative movement of this, I think is interesting. This is if you've heard of Chesterton's fence, maybe we have Chesterton's 40-hour work week in the office is is a
Yeah,
thing. You should think about why it's there before you get rid of it. All right,
that's right.
David, we could go on all day because this is an excellent conversation, but I got to give you back your time. Thank you so much for being with us. But before we go, I know you wear a lot of hats, you got a lot of jobs, you got a lot of irons in the fire, but uh, if you want to give a shout out to where people should find any of your pursuits and links and things online.
Well, I always say the easiest web address for me to give is dividendcafe.com because it doesn't make me spell my last name. So the dividendcafe.com is where I do my weekly investment writing. And then from that website, you'll find all kinds of information about our company, my own writing, and so forth. And so, whether it's Twitter, social media, podcast, video, all those things are out there, but dividendcafe.com would be a good home base to start. And I would certainly love to hear from listeners and stay in touch.
All right. Thanks so much, David.
Thanks for having me.